Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start now. And we just had a little bit of a technical issue when we were trying to compile so many technical dependencies into one moment. It can sometimes be challenging. But here we are. And with me today is my esteemed colleague and a researcher, Mohamed Khamis, that I'm joined with on the stage. So if you want to gather around and put on your streams, live streams, now is your time. So imagine, and all day we have been talking about this, with this fantastic series of events and panels that we did. Now you can train doctors and nurses in a virtual environment and record their performances for subsequent analysis. And this used to be kind of like a dream, but it is actually happening and has been validated by so many researchers all day long today in terms of all the opportunities that are there. Allowing this technology, virtual, augmented, mixed reality, and various intersections, now allowing students to experience operations for learning purposes in a far more immediate and immersive way than they were ever able to do, like by looking over the surgeon's shoulder and stuff. We even saw today how the use of 3D virtual mapping of organs for pre-op diagnosis as an alternative to opening the patient up to take a look. And even XR can now be used to treat autism and phobias by means of exposure to a bespoke virtual and augmented environment. It can be used to diagnose and treat Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and other neurodegenerative. We've heard about, technology being used for PTSD and mental health therapy and all sorts of things like, even using VR to train athletes for sports injuries and whatnot. Needless to say, XR is changing healthcare. And when it comes to medical XR, it all comes down to what kind of reality we want to create. The ultimate aim of XR should not be just to make some killer apps or just focus on what all are the opportunities, but also prioritize patient safety so it remains at the forefront. We should prioritize protection of identity, protection of data, and have some human-centric approach to delivering medical solutions that takes privacy and human autonomy out. So basically, the next question that we're going to ask is, whose responsibility is it to do that? If we could go to the next slide. Um, so that's precisely what Mohammed and I are going to do in the next 20 to 25 minutes. We're going to go over some of these agenda items and conclude with potential solutions that we think is the way to move forward responsibly.
Right. Thank you, Kavya. So hi, everyone. My name is Mohamed. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Glasgow in Scotland in the UK. Where I lead a research group that works in human-computer interaction and user-centered security and privacy. And let me start by thanking Kavya for inviting me today, and also congratulate you all for being involved in such a great event. So the work being presented here is really fascinating, to be honest. There's a great potential for XR in many domains, and especially in the medical domain. It's so inspiring and amazing to see all this great work being done. Some years back, I would have said XR is up and coming, but today, XR is already there. Again, well done everyone for leveraging this technology and being placed to take advantage of this opportunity. All right, so I'm an academic, so I must be wondering, what does this boring academic want to tell us today, right? Probably he will be boasting about his research and so on. But actually, I'm going to do something quite the contrary. I'm going to look at the research in a very critical way and tell you what I'm doing to address this and overcome this. You see on this slide some gadgets, an eye tracker, a brain-computer interface, and a thermal camera. So 7 years ago, when I started my PhD, it was in Germany, and supervisor had all these sorts of gadgets that I wanted to try. So he had computer interfaces, eye trackers, sensors, thermal cameras. And soon afterwards, the HTC Vive came out, and we got one of those, and then we got also the one that has an eye tracker. And I was absolutely fascinated by all of these technologies. I immediately started thinking, probably like everyone in this room when they first came in touch with this technology, what can I do with this technology to make people's lives better? How can I use it to improve people's lives? And started building things like interfaces that react to eye movements and so on. And uh, if we go to the next slide, I will. Yeah. So here, uh, this is some research and work on eye tracking. So one of the things I was particularly interested in is how can we use eye movements to improve the user experience using computers or many types of computers, basically. So this includes mobile phones or headsets and so on. So yeah, then I started building interfaces where you can, where the system would respond to your eye movements. And here in these slides, you can see um, tracking the eyes inside a virtual environment, what attracts people's attention the most. There's some work by NVIDIA in trying to improve the rendering of virtual environments by only rendering the things that we're looking at rather than rendering the entire environment. And this way you can save resources and get VR to work on devices that are cheaper or easier to access and so on. And sometimes I realized all of these features that we are seeing today in not just in XR, but in general mobile phones as well and everything, yeah, there are features, but what if I don't want to share the data that is being collected by these features? What if I don't my social networking app, I don't want it to learn that I'm depressed, for example? What if I don't want the collected gaze data, the gaze data that belongs to me? What if I don't want it to be shared with insurance companies or use it to experiment of with companies using this information to experiment with what type of content to show me. I started looking more into this, and if you can go to the next slide, please. Um, that's when I started finding out about all these interesting things that you could find out through gaze data or different types of behavioral data that you can collect about people. So one of the people that I work with published this work on how to determine personality traits through the eye movements. There were also things about determining the cognitive state of the user or whether they are mind wandering or if they are focused on something. All of that through the eye movements, and this sounds all interesting. But if this is actually possible on your mobile phone, or in the case of this event, what if this is possible in XR? You know, what if I don't want to share this data? What if I don't want the servers or the company or, for example, the people who are organizing, who are, for example, maybe I don't want Kavya to know that I'm not so that an event that, for example, a certain talk that I didn't like, because my eye movements are suggesting that I'm distracted or something. Or maybe I'm worried I might misunderstand what my gaze data is suggesting. So back then, when 7 years ago or so, eye tracking, and also until today, actually, it's something that is very accessible or well understood. I remember I was talking with this guy and telling him I'm doing my PhD in eye tracking, and he was like, "Oh, I know about iPhones. So what is this eye tracking thing?" Um, but now with XR, now we have these headsets that are much cheaper than before, and now more and more people are going to be using these headsets, and which are armed with sensors that can determine all sorts of things about us. Can you get the next slide, please? So this is just an example of some attributes that you can determine from eye movement. So, for example, as you can see here, things like the gender or the race or the age can be determined through the scan path. So even if you don't share this information explicitly by saying that, for example, I'm a male, the system may determine this through your eye movements. And eye movements are things that we perform implicitly. It's not something that we intentionally control, right? So there's a lot of impact here on privacy, and um, gets even more serious when you start looking into things like mental health, and cognitive abilities and so on. I can do the next slide, please. Here I have a video that shows you some examples of data that can be actually today. It's not something futuristic. These are things that you can do today in research. Can you play the video, please, Marco? I don't think I can play it from here. So for example, here you can determine emotions. This is something you already see in apps like Instagram and so on. You can overlay things over people, and with AR headsets, you can do that as you are walking around, right? Here, for example, data is being collected about people that are moving around you, and from that movement data, you can determine things like if they have any disabilities, you can track their performance. In that example here, this is what scares me the most. You can collect data about people around you and then generate 3D models of them, and you can then do with these 3D models whatever you like. And all of this has serious implications on privacy and also safety. You can think of those things like super hearing, super sight, and so on as features, but also they have implications on privacy and security. And this is what Kavya and I are trying to promote today, that it's very important to put into consideration the privacy implications of the technologies that you're developing. It's all great, these features that you're developing, or ideas and startups and everything. That's amazing, but we should keep in mind as well at the same time, what are the privacy implications of that? What could go wrong, basically, and try to address that before these technologies become ubiquitous and before these problems start to impact people in the real world.
And that's where, and thanks, Mohamed. I'm going to deep dive just a little bit deeper into the eye tracking aspect, but more to then zoom out to what we now consider, at least at XRSI, and several entities have started to adopt this term, is to try to grapple with the reality of inferences that can really indicate a lot about a human. So like we consider it biometrically inferred data. Once we establish what to call a term, we then start thinking about what kind of laws that we need to establish, what kind of guidelines and principles that are going to safeguard this type of data. So just like Mohamed just said, eye tracking data may implicitly contain this information about a person's biometric identity, gender, ethnicity. We saw in the video, like personality traits. You could go all the way to drug consumption, emotional state, what are your fears and interests. In fact, just for, we have a closed roundtable tomorrow. For that, I was preparing this research, which basically, with just about 4 specific interests from an individual, you can actually conduct 90% of an accurate nano-targeting using Facebook or Meta tools right now. 90% of accuracy, and I can find that one person that I want to deliver that one message to. So that's really amazing what we can do. And that's not the eye gaze data, that's just fixed eye gaze and all kinds of biometrically inferred data. So next slide, please. What kind of data could we make in that? We could add all this ocean of data, because the reality that we are moving to, it looks very much like, any Trekkies in the crowd, Star Trek, the strike order that basically is potentially used to assess the health of a particular person who may be injured or needing wellness or any kind of therapy. And so if we go to next slide, that's where it becomes even more complicated, because we are going to converge of course, these technologies are converging, but then these data streams that are also interconnected, and a lot of these data is exchanging hands, and it's going to converge into potentially a singular type of device that helps us assess medical information, that helps us even diagnose patients and all sorts of things. So that's when it becomes a dilemma for us. What is that dilemma? We call it the Kohling-Ridge dilemma, something that ethicists often cite when they're trying to wrap their heads around the emerging technologies. It's a double-bind problem. So you can't actually develop these technologies without the data collection. And you have to do that in order to understand, oh, okay, now we've reached this milestone, what are the problems? But by the time we have developed technologies, it may already be too late to undo the effects that could be unintended consequences. And that's the reason why we stand here to try to understand whose responsibility is it? What are we supposed to do with this ocean of data? Because we can't just go all the way until these technologies are fully matured. It would be too late. You can't debias the AI algorithm that combined with XR technologies. Once they're in, they've profiled a certain person, just like Meta a few weeks ago said, they're going to delete all the facial features and pictures and whatever. But hey, the AI has already been trained on that data. So yeah, sure, great, you can delete the pictures, but you can't undo those deep-mind algorithm that may have ingested all this data. So we are here with this kind of a double-bind issue. How do we actually deal with this problem though? And whose responsibility could it be? Because there's tremendous benefits to sharing data, because we're not just talking about risk. I personally, and then here you can see on the slide, that's, tons of opportunities there for both, clinicians and patients and entire industry and the domain. You're going to be able to transform how quickly and accurately you receive information and diagnose patient and do medical assessment. But at the same time, I visited the very first patient who received deep brain stimulation surgery, along with, like, she had a pacemaker, and I was just trying to analyze a security guideline she received from the doctor, and she received like one pager. Not even the fact that she shouldn't connect this stuff to the VPN, without the VPN, or not to a hotspot or something, so she could be hacked. But anyhow, what I realized when I interacted with that patient number one for this deep brain stimulation surgery, she was in 12 out of 10 pain, but she couldn't actually receive the XR pain mitigation, therapy and stuff, which was exactly in the same hospital. She just couldn't because one of the DBS department is not exchanging data with the pain management, or the XR or innovation research department. And it was so sad to watch her suffer in pain. And I was just like, this is something that we need to eliminate, these barriers within the patient hospital network, because why shouldn't she be able to groundbreaking pain mitigation therapy that she can use with XR? She's already connected via these, devices. So that's something that we are obviously going to benefit from. But then the next slide, the next question that we have to confront is, what are the privacy, security, and safety of medical XR? How are we going to make sure that these things are safe for us? And the medical XR data, the ocean of data that we just saw, EMG, all sorts of mental inference, biometrically inferred data, how are we going to be able to trust that data is now in the hands of developers, for example? How are we going to be able to trust that me as a patient, I have autonomy over the actions that I'm performing when the feedback is directly coming from some electronic device telling me to move my muscle, or not even telling me moves my muscle without even my permission? So these are challenges that we have to really confront and establish. That's precisely what we are trying to do, is trying to understand whose responsibility is it. And so next slide, please. And so we're trying to understand that, and establish that patient privacy and safety, it is a shared responsibility. Because with these great superpowers, and Mohamed even indicated that you can have super sight, have super hearing, all of that is fun and dandy, but that comes with responsibilities. Back in the days early on, you have these Hippocratic oath for the doctors and clinicians. But that's the kind of responsibility that we have with doctors, unions, developers, regulators, and mostly patient themselves. Because one thing that, at least in the United States, we hold dear is HIPAA, Health Information Patient Privacy Act. That is inadequate to address that much amount of data related issues, especially biometrically inferred data. And so how are we doing that? Is we have this medical XR council that potentially, interacts and interfaces with regulators, with patients themselves, with many academics, just like Mohamed, who has graciously been sharing research. So currently, we are actively sharing research, exchanging knowledge with University of Glasgow. That's where Mohamed is, and NHS Health Education England. We've, graciously sponsored this entire track just so we can share all the work that we are doing and invite guys to participate. San Diego doing tremendous amount of research with the medical council, build what we consider is the medical XR privacy and safety framework. And then finally, MTech Lab, their current program, which basically gives out about 40,000 UK pounds, or I believe US dollars of pounds, and XRRA Research and Award. So this is really all just to be able to help build safe medical XR ecosystem. And so finally, here is what you can do. You can also take part in building these safe ecosystems. You can make this future truly safe and private. Is our 2022 for XRSI and any other entity I just mentioned going to be entirely focused on research and comprehending that research to build standards and frameworks. So I encourage all the nonprofits, universities, governments, research labs, and any think tank to share these responsibilities with us. With this great power, this is our moment to step up front and really take on the challenges of data, privacy, safety, and share that responsibility. I want to hand over to Mohamed because I know University of Glasgow has got some specific initiative as well. Mohamed, before we close, I learned about that, and I think it's a great opportunity for everyone else to learn about.
Yeah, thanks, Kavya. Yeah, and we are indeed, so in the University of Glasgow, we're starting soon a project with Facebook where we are looking into child safety and in virtual reality in social VR. So in events like these, how can we protect the privacy and the safety of children? How to give their parents an ability to have an oversight over what their children are experiencing, if they're experiencing any types of cyberbullying or so. We're having more and more upcoming projects in this domain and also in trying to assess the privacy risks of eye tracking in VR and AR and trying to address these risks. So if you're interested in any of those areas, or if you have specific concerns or about XR, or you want to make sure that your technology or your approaches are privacy aware, that they don't have security implications, that they are safe and so on, please get in touch. We're very open to collaborating with other people from industry, from academia, and organizations, and nonprofits, and everything. So please get in touch, and we can definitely find ways to collaborate and help each other.
Wonderful. And thank you again for taking part in this session all day. And really appreciate you guys sticking around for the talk. And thank you to the entire team. This is the closing session of the day, I suppose. And so we're going to send a wrap up. If you've missed out on any of the sessions, you can catch up on the newsletter. Definitely sign up if you haven't already. And thanks to Joshua, Marco, big shout out. What a successful day. And we persisted through technical challenges, but certainly had some incredible conversations that will have great impact on humanity and future of medical XR. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.